Night falls, and an American cockroach moves along the base of a wall, the same path it has walked hundreds of times before. It stops beside a crack, feels the air with its antennae, and finds nothing out of place. There never is. A little more than a foot away, an emerald wasp stands completely still. She is a fraction of the cockroach's size. If it decided to run right now, she could never catch it. But it won't. Because it doesn't know yet that it should. The wasp waits. She doesn't chase her prey the way most predators her size do. Everything depends on a single strike. Miss it once, and the chance is gone. The cockroach keeps moving. Its antennae sweep the ground. Nothing raises the alarm. And yet, in a few seconds, something inside its body is about to change. It won't lose the ability to walk. It won't stop moving its legs. It will lose something far more important: the urge to run. She measures about an inch, barely more. She'd fit, with room to spare, on the tip of a thumb. Her body shines a metallic blue-green that shifts with the light, not from pigment, but from the microscopic structure of her exoskeleton itself, layer upon layer, bending the light like polished metal. That shimmer makes her almost impossible to mistake for any other wasp her size. She belongs to a family known as the hunting wasps, and like all of them, she isn't hunting for herself. She's hunting for a larva that doesn't exist yet. Here's the first fact that matters. This wasp doesn't eat cockroaches. She uses them. Each female lays exactly 1 egg per cockroach, not several. 1. Which means every single hunt isn't just another meal among many. It's the entire supply of resources her one offspring will have to grow from larva to adult. A failed hunt isn't a missed opportunity. It's an entire generation that never happens. And out of every insect available to her, only one species will do: the American cockroach. Not crickets, not beetles, not any other insect her size. It has to be that species, and it has to be alive when she finds it. The obvious question is why, and the answer starts with size. An adult American cockroach can outweigh the wasp, hunting it several times over. Longer legs, more raw strength, a tougher shell, and a nervous system built to react in a fraction of a second to any threat it senses. In a straight fight between a 2-centimeter insect and something 4 times its size, there's no real question of who wins. So the emerald wasp doesn't compete on strength. She competes on something else. She finds her prey by scent, not in some general sense, but by following one very specific chemical trail: the compounds cockroaches leave behind in cracks, damp walls, and the corners where they shelter. She isn't wandering, hoping to stumble across a meal. She's following an invisible map the cockroach has been leaving, without knowing it, night after night, for its entire life. Those same corners, under pipes, between bricks, beside drains, have stayed safe territory for the American cockroach for millions of years. It's a species that has survived almost everything: shifting climates, food scarcity, an entire species of ape trying to wipe it out. But survival doesn't require being ready for every possible threat. It requires being ready for the usual ones. And nowhere in its instincts, refined over countless generations, is there a response built for what's about to happen. Because what makes this wasp remarkable isn't her size, or her color, or even her sense of smell. It's that she's solved a problem no other predator her size has solved the same way: how to beat an animal that's bigger, stronger, and better armored, without relying on strength to do it. Other hunting wasps solve that same problem with pure paralytic venom. They shut the prey down completely, every muscle at once, and drag it, dead weight, back to the nest. It works. But it comes with a real cost, one that's easy to overlook. A fully paralyzed body is exactly that: dead weight that someone has to carry, push, or drag the entire way there. The emerald wasp can't afford that cost, and she doesn't need to. Capturing a live cockroach would already be a remarkable feat for an insect her size. But capturing it alive isn't her final goal. What she needs is something far harder than that. The wasp closes in from behind, out of the cockroach's field of view. For decades, this moment was pictured a simple way: a tiny predator, a defenseless victim, a clean and effortless strike. But a 2024 study from Vanderbilt University changed that picture completely. Researchers filmed the encounter frame by frame, under the kind of magnification the naked eye never gets, and found something no one had documented in this much detail. The cockroach doesn't wait quietly to be attacked. It fights back. The instant it feels the vibration or the touch of the wasp, the cockroach responds with fast, precise kicks, using the spines on its hind legs like blades aimed straight at its attacker's soft body. This isn't a clumsy reflex. It's a strike strong enough, in many cases, to seriously injure the wasp or knock her far enough away to end the hunt entirely. The researchers found something even more surprising. In a large share of the encounters they recorded, the cockroach wins. The wasp retreats, hurt, or simply unable to continue. That has a consequence rarely mentioned. Every hunting attempt is, quite literally, a bet placed with the wasp's own body. One well-placed kick can tear a wing, damage the stinger, or leave her injured long enough for something else to find her first. There's no guaranteed second try, no backup plan. Every time she spots a cockroach, she has to decide, in an instant, whether it's worth the risk. So before talking about mind control, it's worth saying this clearly. The emerald wasp isn't overpowering a passive victim. She's surviving a real fight against an animal that's bigger, armed, and knows how to defend itself. To have any chance, she needs to disable that defense before it can be used. She does it by aiming her stinger at one very specific spot on the underside of the cockroach's thorax, between two plates of its shell, one of the only places on its body thin enough for the stinger to get through. That first strike isn't meant to kill. It's meant to disconnect the front legs for a few seconds. The cockroach suddenly can't coordinate that first pair of legs. Enough to stop the kicking. Not enough to stop it completely. It's still standing, still breathing, still able, in theory, to run on its other four legs. It's a very narrow window, 2 or 3 minutes, no more. And it's inside that window that everything defining this species actually happens. Because that first sting was never the attack. It was the setup. With the front legs briefly out of action, the wasp finally has the stillness she needs to place her second sting exactly where she wants it. This time, she isn't aiming at the thorax. She's aiming at the head. Not roughly. She searches, between the plates of the cockroach's skull, for an entry point so narrow that only a precise strike, guided by sensors on the tip of the stinger itself, can find it without ever seeing what lies beneath. Worth pausing on that for a second. The wasp has no way to see inside the cockroach's head. No compound eye, however sharp, can look through a shell. What she has instead is a stinger that works, in practice, like a probing instrument, able to feel, by touch, the texture and resistance of the tissue it's moving through until it recognizes the exact spot it's searching for. It feels its way in before it injects anything. The second strike doesn't immobilize anything. It goes after something far harder to defend, the decision to move at all. And against that, despite millions of years spent dodging predators, kicks included, the cockroach has no answer ready. 30 minutes. That's how long it takes the cockroach to stop compulsively grooming, running its legs over its antennae and head again and again, unable to do anything else while the second venom spreads through its brain. When that episode ends, there's no visible collapse. The cockroach simply stops moving on its own. It can still walk if something pushes it. It can still fly if stimulated hard enough. Its legs, its wings, its muscles all work exactly as they should. Minutes later, the wasp takes hold of its antenna and starts walking toward the burrow. And the cockroach follows. There's no leash, no shove, no dragging of any kind. One simple tug on the antenna is enough to send an animal 4 times the wasp's size walking in exactly the direction she chooses, crossing the same ground it was, minutes ago, free to roam. Why does it follow, when every physical ability to refuse is still intact? The answer sits in the exact spot the second sting reached, a cluster of neurons that functions, in practice, as the seat of the insect's own initiative. The venom lowers activity in that one region without touching the circuits that carry out movement once it's started. It's the difference between cutting the ignition wire and destroying the engine. The wasp chooses the wire. That's also the real difference between the two stings. The first, loaded with GABA, blocked the signal to the front legs for a couple of minutes. A simple venom, the kind many insects use for a quick, temporary lockdown, and on its own, it would never have gotten her this far. The moment it wore off, the cockroach would have bolted. The second, loaded with dopamine, doesn't block a single muscle. It switches off, with almost surgical precision, the part of the brain that decides to use them. Some researchers confirmed the mechanism without any wasp at all. They injected a local anesthetic into that same brain region in cockroaches that had never been stung, without touching a single leg. The result was nearly identical to a real sting. Movement stayed intact. The will to start it didn't. What the wasp accomplishes in an instant, with one motion of her stinger, took a laboratory-precise instruments to reproduce. That state lasts, at most, 72 hours. Not a minute longer than she needs to reach the burrow. A walk that, for an insect her size, hauling the borrowed will of a creature 4 times her weight, can take long, exposed minutes, crossing open ground where any other predator could pick off either one of them. And not a minute less than it takes for the cockroach, once inside, to be past the point of doing anything about what comes next. Because all of this control over another creature's brain answers to no whim. It has one very specific purpose. And that purpose explains why, out of every possible way to solve this problem, evolution landed on this one. The burrow isn't much. A crack that was already there, a gap between stones, sometimes a tunnel abandoned by some other insect. The emerald wasp doesn't build anything of her own, not so much as a chamber. She simply finds a hole narrow enough to seal shut afterward, using whatever debris she can find nearby. Inside, the cockroach is still standing, still under the second venom, still without any impulse pushing it to leave, even though nothing is physically stopping it. And then comes the gesture that explains why everything before it had to happen in exactly that order. The wasp positions herself beside one of the cockroach's middle legs and lays a single egg, glued to the base of that leg, tucked into a fold of the cuticle. Then she leaves the burrow and starts dragging stones, dirt, and debris to seal the entrance completely. The cockroach is sealed in, alive, with no way out. Not because it can't move, but because nothing inside it is asking it to try. A few days later, the egg hatches. The larva that emerges is tiny, barely visible, and in its first stage, it doesn't do what you'd expect. It doesn't enter the cockroach's body. It feeds from the outside, piercing the cuticle just enough to draw hemolymph, the insect equivalent of blood. This outer stage lasts several days. It's, in a way, the single most fragile point in the whole process. The larva depends entirely on the cockroach staying still and alive long enough for it to grow big enough to take the next step forward. And here's why nothing before this was left to chance. A venom that only paralyzes lasts minutes, maybe hours. The larva needs days. It needs exactly this in-between state, a working body, an absent will, held for precisely as long as each stage of its development takes. Once the larva is large enough, it widens the opening it's been feeding through and moves inside the cockroach's body. From there, it starts consuming the internal organs, one by one, in an order that's anything but random. It saves for last whatever keeps the cockroach alive. The heart, the central nervous system. Everything essential stays running until the very last possible moment. There's no mercy in that sequence. There's optimization. A dead host decomposes, draws bacteria, stops being reliable. A host kept alive, with its vital functions intact until the end, is a supply of fresh food that never spoils while the larva needs it. Once there's almost nothing left to consume, the larva spins a cocoon inside what remains of the cockroach's body, now turned, quite literally, into an empty shell that also shields the larva from other predators while it completes its metamorphosis. Weeks later, out of that same sealed hole comes an adult wasp, metallic, blue-green, ready to repeat, alone, with nothing learned from anyone, the exact same two-sting sequence that brought her into the world. No single wasp ever decided, one day, to aim for the brain instead of the body. It took generations. Thousands, probably millions, of emerald wasps hunting cockroaches in slightly different ways. The ones that struck the wrong spot lost the larva, or lost their life in the fight. The ones that, by genetic chance, struck a little closer to the brain got prey that was a little more docile, larvae with a little more time, and a slightly better shot at reaching the next generation. Run that filter millions of times, and what's left isn't luck. It's precision. No one drew a map of the cockroach's nervous system for the wasp to memorize. No one taught her where to inject dopamine and where to inject GABA. That knowledge doesn't live in her conscious mind. It's encoded in her body, refined sting by sting over a span of time no human being has ever witnessed directly. And that, maybe, is the detail that changes how you look at this insect for good. This isn't a predator built on strength or speed or even intelligence in any sense we usually mean. It's the outcome of a blind process that, with no plan and no conscious purpose, ended up producing something indistinguishable from deliberate surgery. The American cockroach has been surviving, almost unchanged, for more than 300 million years. It has outlasted mass extinctions, ice ages, an entire species trying every method available to wipe it out. And still, faced with an insect 6 times smaller than itself, it loses something it doesn't even know it has lost: the ability to decide for itself. Maybe that's the most uncomfortable part of this whole story. It doesn't take strength to beat something much larger. It doesn't take lethal venom, speed, or numbers. It takes finding, among millions of possibilities, the one exact point where another creature's will lives, and touching it with enough precision. Right now, as this documentary ends, a wasp is standing perfectly still beside a crack in a wall. A cockroach is approaching. It can still run. In a few seconds, it will still have legs. It will still have wings. It will still have more than enough strength to escape. The only thing that will be gone is the idea of doing it. The closer you look, the stranger the world becomes.